This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to rumble!
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod. I'm Tony Pesta, joined by Jackson Flickinger and Corey Walsh. And the Cleveland Cavaliers just lost their 10th game of the season last night. That means our dream of going 73-9 is officially dead. But you know what? Getting the ring is still the most important thing. So we'll see how the rest of the season goes. On today's episode, we're going to recap yesterday's loss to the Boston Celtics. And then in the second half, we'll give some last-second thoughts on the NBA trade deadline. Specifically, our thoughts on DeAndre Hunter and Cam Johnson, the two guys who have really been rumored and linked to the Cavs the most. Before we get started, let me ask everyone to please hit that follow button, subscribe, drop a like. Make sure you're keeping up with us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. We really appreciate all that support. And all right, let's get into this. The Cavs now, they've played the Celtics 3 times this season. They have a 1-2 record. I think you could argue every game was winnable, but the results are 1-2 there. Honestly, I don't think we learned anything new from last night's game. I don't think there was any revelations. We just kind of got further confirmation on things that we on this podcast have spent the last 2 years talking about. So I want to start us off with Evan Mobley, because I think we all agree that Mobley is probably the key to beating Boston in a playoff series. Last night he struggled. Just 7 points on 3 of 14 shooting. Certainly one of the worst games he's played this season, if not the worst. Jackson, what is your take on how Evan Mobley played last night?
I would say that maybe we have learned something from yesterday's game. I think that there's a distinct pattern between when Mobley plays good against the Celtics and when Mobley has not played good against the Celtics, and that happens to be Kristaps Porzingis. In the playoffs, he wasn't available. He wasn't available in the Cavs' first matchup with the Celtics, but he was available the last two, and in those last 2 games, Mobley hasn't looked very good. So I think that he just adds an element that, maybe Mobley can figure it out, but he hasn't figured it out in these 2 games. And I would have liked to have seen Atkinson go down with the Mobley ship. He seemed to really want to.
I prefer that over Niang.
Pivot to Niang. This was a topic of discussion in the media room while we were waiting for Kenny Atkinson. I said, guys, why would you want to lose with Niang when you can lose with your all-star center that needs to kind of work through these things? And this is the matchup needs to work through. So, that was my take, is that, like, he played bad. He was awful. 3 of 15 from the field. 3 or 14, I think, actually. So not good stuff. Wasn't an impactful defender. That said, he's still Evan Mobley, and, the alternative of George Niang wasn't palatable either. So, just go down with your best player, or at least like your second or third best player, as opposed to your 9th best player.
Somewhere in that order.
But
yeah, I think it's important not to get carried away on piling on Mobley. I saw a lot of people very upset. Listen, he's had good games against Boston, including games in the playoffs. So this is one game. But Corey, what were your thoughts? Because I gave Evan Mobley an F in the grades. I think that's the first time I've given him an F all year.
Yeah, it felt like with Mobley, like the whole team came out kind of with the yips, it felt like, in the first quarter. Shots that were falling for this team for a season, like the whole season, just kind of felt like the water shut off. I didn't really have an issue with the shots they were taking, but I mean, the Celtics were missing open layups and open shots as well. And while it felt like the rest of the Cavs kind of got their footing under them in the quarters to follow, Mobley kind of was just following the same pattern. I mean, he was taking the shots to stretch the floor that you would have wanted him to take. They were very short, I felt like, compared to what we've seen from him this past season. And I don't understand the Atkinson train of thought either. I think, with younger players, sometimes the kind of sit on the bench and observe, see how other players attack method kind of works. But Mobley's past that point. He's only going to learn from kind of figuring out as he goes. And like you guys are saying, if we're using Niang in end of game scenarios, it's not like that they were past the point where they needed to break glass in case of emergency for offense, which is where you saw Kenny kind of going with that mindset early on. They kind of threw they're like, we're already down 20. We might as well throw defense out the window because we're not stopping them anyway and just try to maximize floor spacing here. But I mean, 0 points and 5 fouls for me didn't really space the floor at all. And I don't think the Celtics were too bummed when he stepped onto the floor either.
He had 5 points, I think.
Well, there was a point where he was like 0 points, 4 fouls.
I mean,
he started
in the pivotal minutes.
There's a point everybody has 0 points.
It was a long point.
I do want to say
15 minutes.
I do want to say that I don't understand the idea that like you have to have Niang playing the 4, especially when he doesn't have it, because it wasn't like he was. We've seen him struggle on the defensive side of the ball, but then provided on offense. That Rockets game is an example of that, where like. He wasn't playing any defense, but if you give him an open shot, he was knocking it down. That wasn't the Celtics game. So I don't understand the point of like he has to be out there for his size because he's a non-factor on the glass. And it's not like he's a good defender. So it's like, why couldn't you go small and try to get minutes with like Karis LeVert, Max Strus playing the 4? I know you don't have Isaac Okoro. He's somebody else you could throw there, but it's like you're not getting any benefit from having a big out there, a traditional big, which Niang is, even though he's a shooter. So why not try to go with like a 3-4 guard look?
Yeah, I mean there were points in the game where there were 3 or 4 guards out there, but still Niang played like 25 minutes. Mobley only played 28. So I understand. I think Corey said it perfectly. Like I get that you want to when you're down in the hole. And no one's hitting threes. You're trying to hit that break glass in case of emergency and get like a couple 3-pointers out of Niang to change the tides. But he clearly didn't have it. And I think that was a misstep from Kenny Atkinson to play Niang as long as he did. As for Mobley, Jackson mentioned Kristaps Porzingis. Here's the thing. Boston's front court, both Porzingis and Kornet, can do a pretty good. I know Boston, we say their lack of rim protection is like their biggest weakness, but when Porzingis and Kornet are able to sit in the paint and build a wall, they're actually pretty good at protecting the rim if you don't have to draw them out. And that's what happened to Mobley in this game. I think Corey mentioned he shot 0 of 4 from deep, didn't have the mid-range going either. The Celtics bigs just sagged off him and challenged Mobley at the rim, and Mobley had a hard time going. So as far as his self-creation goes against Boston, if he's not knocking down 3-pointers or at least converting from the middle of the floor, whether it's a jumper or a floater, he's going to have a hard time, especially against Porzingis. I expect Porzingis to give him problems. Got to win the Kornet minutes. He didn't win the Kornet minutes either. It was just an all-around bad game for Mobley. But as far as his, attacking one-on-one, that was a big aspect there is that they just sagged off him and he just didn't have the jumper going the way that we've seen this year. The other aspect of this, I think we can kind of transition to the other Cavaliers here. Mobley, to a degree, if he's not creating for himself, he needs the guards to be wreaking havoc and having an efficient game to give him some room to operate. Garland and Mitchell shot 7 of 22 from deep. The Cavs overall shot 28% from 3 in this game. So Mobley, he really counts on the backcourt to have an efficient night because then that lets him tap into the other aspects of his game as a pick and roll threat, as a lob threat, someone who can catch a dump off pass. When the guards aren't really being too efficient, and I thought they played well overall. We'll get to them in just a second, but there was a little bit of give and take there where Mobley's self-creation wasn't working for him and no one was able to set him up. And so we saw probably the worst game he's played all year.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't good. Darius starting out 2 of 8 from the field. He had a tough first half. I felt that the Cavs, even though they kind of came back a little bit, I feel like they really lost this game in the first quarter. And I know Garland was hit in the nose once again, which makes you question some things. But we're not gonna get into that.
No victim blaming on the Junkyard Pod, please.
We were, but that had an impact. But like they really needed him to step up in that first half to really get the offense going because Donovan Mitchell was the only one who was able to do anything. Even though Jarrett Allen had a good game, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it felt like he missed some easy ones in the first half that really, really.
I think he shot 6 of 11 overall, which like normally isn't that bad, but for Jarrett Allen, you're talking like a 70% shooter.
So they really needed Darius to kind of get them going in the beginning of the game, and I don't think he did a good job of that. So, it was a tough loss. This team's going to lose when they shoot 29% from 3. I think that's well documented. And you'd like to see just a better game from Evan Mobley.
Yeah. As for the backcourt real quick, I just want to say, I think It's really strange because it was one of the weird inefficient nights where both Mitchell and Garland were relatively inefficient. At the same time, there were stretches of the game where the only reason it was even close is because Mitchell and Garland were just rattling off these like great stretches. But it was like every time we gained momentum, it wasn't just Garland and Mitchell doing this. It was everyone on the team, but Garland and Mitchell especially. Garland had some bad turnovers in the third quarter when we were gaining momentum. Mitchell had moments of tunnel vision where he, forces a three-pointer that maybe we should have taken our time with, get a better shot up. Few turnovers of his own, one where he just kind of dribbled off his own foot backcourt. It was like every time the Cavs gained momentum, there were these unforced errors that gave it right back to Boston. And Boston is just too good to have that many unforced turnovers, and the Cavs did themselves no favors. But Corey, what did you think of the Garland-Mitchell backcourt game?
I thought it had its moments. I mean, obviously being down 20, Mitchell came off really strong in the beginning, and then it kind of just felt like they were seesawing in terms of who had it going versus who didn't. And it kind of reminded me of sequences we saw from this team last season where it kind of felt like it was his, like, just taking turns more than the kind of connectivity we've seen from this team. I mean, there's a sequence to near the end of the game where Mitchell passes the ball to a congested Strus, I believe, in the corner when Garland was open on the right side. That could have easily just been he didn't see it in the time, or he was trying to think too far ahead of where I think White was going to end up on the rotation. But it just felt like the two were never in sync in this game. And Mitchell took some questionable shots towards the end of the game. I think they just felt like they were heat checks at the time. I mean, he took a heavily contested three, only down 4 near the end of the game that I thought was it. It just, those types of plays just aggravate me, but that's like when Mitchell hits those, you never question them. So it's unfair to be like, oh, you shouldn't have taken that when he was hitting equally tough shots just in less crucial moments. But yeah, I mean, this team, for as much as we say like Mobley is like what changes this team between tiers, in this game specifically, it felt like the Cavs were only going to go as far as the two guards went, and they just never seemed like they were synced up at the same time.
Well, I mean, that's the problem. Every great team has good guard play for the most part. The differentiator is nobody has Mobley, nobody has Allen, and you've seen when they're both on that first OKC game, they were both on. The Cavs, punch them in the face. OKC has no response, and that's where it's like, well, if you're relying on Garland and Mitchell to be the whole offense, you're getting away from what you do best. You have one big out there because the second big can't hang. That's when you're just not the best version of yourself, and the Cavs aren't going to beat a team like the Celtics when they're just not their best version.
And I also feel.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Corey.
I feel like another thing that makes this Cav team so different is that they show their depth on a lot of different nights. And it felt like last night was one of the few games this season where it felt like no matter who they threw out there, nothing was necessarily working. And the Celtics, for as shallow as the bench kind of works for the Celtics, but it feels like every time we play the Celtics, at least 2 of their bench guys absolutely go off on us. It's usually Pritchard and then maybe Hauser sometimes, but it was Horford last night. I felt like Horford had great possessions for them as well. It's just something where the Cavs just couldn't get it right with their rotations, and it's something that we're going to discuss soon, is that this is like kind of showing us what we need to look for at the deadline. It's not something where we can wait for the buyout market anymore.
Corey, please apologize to Sam Merrill. He doesn't need to be lumped into your.
Sam did play good off the bench.
That's true. I redact everyone but Sam Merrill.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah. But to that point, I want to build off that because I think there's something interesting that we're kind of hitting on here, is that when you look at a team like the Celtics, it's so many players on their roster, from the stars just to the role players, are interchangeable on any given night. Like if Jason Tatum doesn't have it going, that doesn't really affect Jaylen Brown. If Jaylen Brown's not going, that doesn't stop Derek White from getting his, doing his thing, or Jrue Holiday, whoever else. They're just so interchangeable in what they provide. With the Cavs, we do kind of get this give or take where it's like, well, Mitchell's struggling, and so that's kind of putting Mobley in a weird spot, and Allen's not doing his thing, and so Garland's having a hard time. Like, they're a little more – they influence each other a little more than other cores, like especially Boston being the greatest example of, like, yeah, if Tatum doesn't have it going, that really doesn't impact Jaylen Brown's game that much. If Garland doesn't have it going, now there's like this cascading effect with the rest of the Cavs. And that's where there's so many variables that you need to fall your way in order to beat a team like the Celtics. And last night, the Cavs, like I said, they really did themselves no favors. But before we move on, I got to quickly mention Jarrett Allen because we briefly mentioned him. But listen, he was absolutely awesome last night. This is by far the best game he's had against the Celtics, maybe ever in a Cavs uniform. We've been waiting for him to have a big game. 17 points. 18 rebounds in 32 minutes.
He had a big game last year in the Dean Wade game. I think he played well.
Well, he was overshadowed. He was overshadowed by the Dean Wade explosion. But, I mean, either way, amazing game on both ends of the floor. He had that massive block on Porzingis, some great offensive rebounds that were keeping the Cavs in it. I legitimately think they'd lose by like 20 or 30 if it wasn't for Allen. And so that's really nice to see because now we have a little bit of a proof of concept that, okay, Allen can hang in this matchup. It's possible. There's a path for Allen to have a good series against Boston. You need to see Mobley click with him on the same night, like we did against OKC. But it was just nice to see. Okay, we lost this game, but at least Allen showed that he can. The lights aren't too bright every time he plays Boston because it felt like that for a while.
I think the whole issue is that you need both of them to play well against Boston, and they haven't shown that both of them can play well. I don't think at any point in their career against the Celtics. So like at the same exact time. So that's sort of the whole argument is that like, if they both can't play well like at the same time against Boston, and Boston's the only team that you really need to, like every move should be about, does this make you better against the Celtics? Does it make you worse against the Celtics? And that's where I think there's still some unanswered questions because, well, maybe there's not unanswered questions because we've had 3 games and we haven't had one game where both of them are really playing well together at the same time and using their height as an advantage against the Celtics as opposed to like, oh, this is a disadvantage because we can't, play defense like we want to. We can't attack like we want to. So, it's good that Allen was the one that had a good game, which hasn't always been the case. But, if it's only one, then what's the point?
Yeah, and I do think on paper it's possible for them both to have a good game. I know we haven't seen it, but I do think they can replicate what they did against OKC to the Celtics. And really, it's been no shade down. He was incredible the last game, but it's really been more of an Allen thing than a Mobley thing. Mobley's been pretty good against the Celtics for the most part. We just need Allen to show up. Any last takes on Cavs Celtics?
He's played more against the Celtics.
Just off the Jarrett Allen thing, I think it's easier for Jarrett Allen to look good in these games where Mobley doesn't play well because the Cavs offense is completely different if Mobley can't unlock the things that he shows on his good nights where he kind of operates on a different level offensively. When Allen plays well, it seems to be when the Cavs have to kind of revert to their old play style of heavy pick and roll with him. It doesn't feel like because like when you put George Niang out there next to Allen, it's going to be a completely different offensive look than if Mobley's out there next to Allen. It's completely different. So I feel like it's nice that Allen looks good in these games, but like Jackson's kind of saying, it's like it's a completely different play style than they would play if it was their starting 5 out there to end games. If you're putting out Niang, you're not going to run the same stuff.
And on the Niang point, I think this is a great way for us to transition and talk about the NBA trade deadline. Because listen, last night you saw it. We bang the Dean Wade drum all the time on this broadcast, but you know what? When you don't have Wade, the outcome is your bench units. Niang is the closest thing you have to a backup big. More often than not, you're playing with 1 big and 4 guards, which we saw against Boston. You realize how desperate this team is for a single athletic wing on the bench. The Cavs can't get rebounds or have any backside rim protection in those lineups without Wade. And so let's talk about everyone's 2 favorite trade targets. The Cavs have now been officially linked to both Cam Johnson and DeAndre Hunter. As of recording, we're just under 24 hours from the trade deadline. Both of those players, Hunter and Cam, they're fairly comparable in terms of build and play style. There's some differences there. I think all of us here prefer Cam Johnson, but there is a case to be made for Hunter not being a bad complementary piece if this is what you're able to get if Cam Johnson isn't available. So I'll share my thoughts, but let's start with Corey. Cam Johnson and DeAndre Hunter. What are your thoughts on these 2 players and their fit with the Cavs?
I think whomever, if the Cavs end up getting one of the 2, it will show what this management thinks of this Cavs team, because I think if you think the window is now and you want to be a part of this arms race we're seeing right now across the league, this is like one of the most stars-filled trade deadlines I can remember in some time. That it seems like that to me makes me feel like the league thinks that this is pretty open. And I think if the Cavs think it's open and they just saw how the Cavs played against the Celtics in 3 of the games and said, we're close, but we've gotten out slow every single time. And it's because we have to constantly adjust to how the Celtics play, because they play in a way that isn't really helpful to the Cavs. The Cavs don't have the necessary personnel to compete with that. And if you think the Cavs are championship contenders, you really just have to build your team around how to beat Boston. It's not like, oh, how are we going to get past New York in round 2 if we have to play them, or Milwaukee? I mean, even Milwaukee's trading for Kyle Kuzma, whatever you think that actually does for them. I personally don't think it does anything, but
probably not. Yeah.
If you want to go win now, you should just go for Cam Johnson and just pay the price of what you have to. I think to me, he's a completely different tier of player than DeAndre Hunter. I think DeAndre Hunter is a player where you're like, oh, I just kind of want to shuffle the deck and kind of just swap one player of equal caliber for another player at a different position of equal caliber with LeVert to him, or like Okoro and another player to him. But Cam Johnson would take this team to a level where I think they'll match up against Boston extremely well. He fits the offense. Defensively, he would be good enough to be on the floor, and we can't just keep waiting for Dean Wade to be healthy because we haven't seen enough of it. So they have to do something, and they can't wait for the buyout market. So my pick would be Cam.
Yeah, I mean, it all just comes back to like the asking price and like what's realistic. I think that if I read an article for Fear the Sword today about how the Cavs should go all in for Cam Johnson. I believe that. I think that it's more realistic than other people, but you also don't know how Sean Marks is going to handle this, because I don't think he handled the Dorian Finney-Smith situation well by holding on to him throughout the summer and then getting less for him this season. You know, they tried to trade Cam Johnson last summer. They're trying to trade him now. They could always hold on to him and sell him for less in the summer. That's always an option. And if that's what they decide to do, then there's nothing the Cavs can do about it. But I think if the Cavs go all in, they do have the best offer on the table for him. And I think he would change the whole outlook of this team. Corey kind of went into why, but I think that it is good that the Cavs are looking at they've identified that their biggest issue is they need guys who can play the 3 and the 4, and Hunter and Johnson can both play the 3 and the 4. Hunter isn't as good. He isn't the offensive player. He has less of a track record of being a good offensive player. Really, it's his only like a second year of being an efficient, good piece in an offense. And we don't have like the history of him fitting into a good contender in a way that Cam Johnson was able to do with the Suns. So I think that's an important piece, because despite what Brad Doherty says, the Hawks are actually a very bad team, and putting up points on a bad team is different than doing it on a good team. And the years that, Hunter has been good, the Hawks haven't been. So not to say that it won't work. We just kind of don't. That's an unknown risk. And if you are giving up, Tyson and a first, that's a big risk to take. And that's probably not one that I would take, even though I usually err on the side of being aggressive, but I don't know if Hunter's the guy I would go push those chips in for.
Yeah, so I'm gonna share my thoughts on these two players. I want to frame it this way too, because I know that people in the comments will probably ask, what is the asking price for both of these players? And I'm just gonna say it's probably some combination, some form of Karis LeVert, Jalen Tyson, and our 2031 first round pick. You're probably gonna have to give up at least 2 of those, if not all 3, for Cam Johnson. And so I'm just gonna operate under the assumption that whatever it is, that's enough to get one of these guys. In that scenario, Cam Johnson is my pick 100%. I do think he is a better player than Hunter. I would, in our Junkyard Pod group chat, I said trading for Cam Johnson at that price would be an A+ move to me. DeAndre Hunter, I'm a little bit higher on him than you guys. I would put that at like a B to B+ move for the Cavs. Personally, I would get aggressive and I would make that trade even at the cost of LeVert, Tyson, and the pick. But I understand why there's concerns. Jackson did a good job of highlighting it. To make the case for Hunter, again, he's on a bad team, but if you look at it, he's averaging about 19 points per game on 39% three-point shooting. I do genuinely think he'd be an impactful team defender if he was in the right context. You look at Atlanta, they have so many gaps in their defense that his chance at being an impactful player on defense was just negligible. But in Cleveland, he'd be next to Mobley and Allen. I think he'd look much better on defense. And look, he's a 6'8" wing, 7'2" wingspan. He can defend multiple positions. He shoots the ball somewhat efficiently. He offers some additional rebounding. He fits with either big. I think he'd start for this team right away. So that's why I would be willing to give up that package of LeVert, Tyson, and the pick without blinking. If Johnson's not available, then I'd take Hunter as the next best piece. But all of that stuff I just said about Hunter, it does apply to Cam Johnson too. He's slightly less athletic. He's, maybe a little bit thinner, but way better shooter. The wingspan's a little bit shorter, but he makes up for all that by being an elite catch and shoot threat. One of the best off-ball role players in the NBA. Hunter is a bit streaky with his three-point shot. Cam is just straight consistency. Like, that's a legit 40% three-point shooter. You know what you're going to get out of him. Probably not as good of a defender, but I think he's just fine. Like, I think for both Hunter and Johnson, if you're looking at the defense or their rebounding numbers, you have to keep in mind they're going to be way more willing to bust their ass and do all of the little things on a team where they think they have a chance at winning the title versus being a play-in team. Or especially for Hunter, it's like you're kind of just standing around watching Trae Young dribble the ball for the entire game. You'll be a little more juiced and energetic when you're a part of the offense and you have a chance at winning something. So for me, I got to make one of these moves if it's available. If I'm Kobe Altman, I'm walking away with Cam Johnson or DeAndre Hunter, preferably Cam, but Hunter to me is just fine as well.
I do think that it is important to highlight that Johnson is a really good finisher at the rim. He can kind of create his own shot in a little bit of a way that Hunter can't. And I think that that's really important when you're talking about a playoff series, where you need multiple creators. And if you're giving up Caris LeVert, and I know Caris LeVert's not the most popular person in Cleveland, but he is one of the few people who can create his own shot and create for others. And if you trade him away, you're really over leveraged on Ty Jerome, who really doesn't have a track record of doing anything.
See, I just want to push back on that very quickly because I actually think you would end up putting Max Strus into the LeVert role and Ty Jerome would still be your third guard. That's my opinion. I would rather have Max Strus handling the ball off the bench than relying on Ty Jerome that much. Ty Jerome would be like, all right, Strus doesn't have it going. Ty Jerome, it's your turn. I don't think Jerome is the sixth man on this team.
Well, Jerome creates his shot 10 times better than
Jerome's a good player.
Does.
Yeah, but
so
in the playoffs, real quick, if you put it this way, in the playoffs, you're going to have Garland or Mitchell on the floor at all times. So Max Strus is fine as the sixth man to me. If we're talking regular season, Jerome, his ability to create as the lead ball handler helps a lot.
Yeah. But we'll see what happens. We are 24 hours away, or just under 24 hours away. So, we'll be here to talk about it all when it's done.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up. The last thing, just to build on that thought that I just had. If you make one of these trades, the reason why I'm cool with giving up LeVert is because, one, listen, he deserves a lot of credit for his growth as an off-ball player, but those intrusive thoughts still win. And if you flip him, you slide Strus in the six-man role, you get a starting small forward. I think you're going all in on a championship window when right now the window's as open as it's ever going to be. So any last thoughts? All right. That's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. We will be back tomorrow to recap whatever happens at the trade deadline, whether it's a swing or they do nothing. We'll be back with another episode. Me and Corey will be hosting the Cavs watch party against the Detroit Pistons tonight, so make sure you're following Fear the Sword on Playback. Make sure you're following the Junkyard Pod on all of our social media platforms. And with all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree, go Cavs. Brian, when are the Cavs going to trade for KD?